There's a part of you that you've spent your whole life hiding. Not because it's dangerous, but because the world told you it was. You were told to be nice, to be good, to be normal. So you learned to suppress the parts of you that didn't fit. The rage, the jealousy, the hunger, the grief, the strange thoughts that made you feel monstrous. You buried them. You locked them in the basement of your psyche. And you gave that basement a name: shame. But Carl Jung saw through the illusion. He said the self isn't just light, it's shadow. And the parts you've exiled, they're not your enemies. They're your missing pieces. You called them weakness, but they were warnings. You called them sin, but they were signals. And the more you've tried to silence them, the more they've found ways to speak. Through anxiety, through sabotage, through the quiet, aching sense that something isn't right. What if the voice inside you that you're so afraid of is actually trying to guide you? What if your depression is not a flaw, but a protest? A refusal to keep living as half a person? Because the truth is simple. What you suppress doesn't disappear. It transforms. It leaks. It takes over your life from behind the scenes. And unless you turn and face it, you'll spend your whole life being controlled by what you refuse to see. This isn't just psychology. It's prophecy, and it's been waiting for you to wake up. Carl Jung called it the shadow, not as poetry, not as philosophy, but as a warning. It is the hidden twin of your identity, the unconscious vault where every thought, urge, emotion, and instinct you were told to suppress still lives. Not dead, not gone, just buried alive. Your rage, your envy, your lust, your arrogance, your greed, your insecurity, your hunger to be seen, and your fear that you never will be. Every part of you that was once natural was labeled wrong, shameful, selfish, dark. So you buried it, not because you wanted to, but because the world told you it was the price of being loved. And for a while, you believed it worked. You smiled more. You played nice. You fit in. But inside, something festered. Something grew teeth. Because the shadow doesn't disappear. It learns your routines. It memorizes your blind spots. And when you least expect it, it drives. You say things you regret. You chase things that break you. You fear success. You ruin intimacy. You stay stuck, not because you're weak, but because part of you needs to stay stuck. This is the paradox. You think you're in control, but most of your actions aren't conscious decisions. They're unconscious reactions. Your shadow leaks through your tone, through your addictions, through the people you attract, and the ones you push away. It shows up in your dreams, your triggers, your distractions, your compulsions. And no matter how hard you try to meditate it away, ignore it, journal over it, it waits. As Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. That quote isn't poetic. It's diagnostic. Because when you repress a part of yourself, it doesn't disappear. It goes underground. And from there, it rules. You want to know why you procrastinate? Why you overthink? Why you always feel like something's missing? It's because the most powerful parts of you were labeled unacceptable before you even had a chance to understand them. And now, you're haunted by your own silence. The shadow isn't evil. It's not a demon. It's the unintegrated you, the orphan parts of your psyche, still waiting to be seen, to be heard, to be held. It's the version of you that stopped growing the moment you rejected it, and now it's screaming for your attention, not through words, but through chaos, because what you suppress will always return. What you avoid will grow teeth. What you exile will one day claim the throne. And here's the part no one tells you. The longer you pretend it's not there, the more it distorts, the more dangerous it becomes. Repression is a form of violence, a war against the self, and all wars leave scars. So if you keep wondering why life feels heavy, why things repeat, why you feel like two people living in the same body, look closer. The shadow isn't in your way. It is the way. The only way out is in. Carl Jung wasn't afraid of the dark. He didn't flinch at chaos. He didn't sanitize the soul with rational theories or neat labels. Where Freud saw sexual drives and childhood trauma, Jung saw something deeper, older, wilder. He stepped beyond the confines of modern psychology, into the dream worlds of ancient myth, alchemy, and religion. He studied symbols, rituals, archetypes not as superstitions, but as the unconscious language of the human mind. Jung believed that the psyche wasn't a straight line. It was a labyrinth, full of shadows, masks, mirrors, and monsters, each one holding a piece of the self you were taught to forget. And in the center of that labyrinth, he found what he called the shadow. Not a fantasy, not a metaphor, but a real psychological force. A hidden dimension of your mind, formed by everything you've rejected to survive. He saw that society doesn't raise individuals. It manufactures personas, masks you wear to be accepted, polite, agreeable, harmless. But behind every mask is the shadow it hides. Not evil, not broken, just exiled, because you weren't born ashamed. You were taught to be. Taught that anger is dangerous. That power is selfish. That desire is dirty. That vulnerability is weakness. So you split yourself in two. The you the world accepts, and the you it doesn't want to see. Jung understood something radical. Healing isn't about becoming better. It's about becoming whole. And to become whole, you have to turn around and face the parts you left behind. The shadow isn't trying to destroy you. It's trying to come home. But only if you're brave enough to open the door. Modern neuroscience doesn't contradict Jung. It confirms him. Repression isn't poetic. It's biological. It's not just a concept in therapy rooms. It's happening in your brain. Right now. When you suppress an emotion, it doesn't disappear. You just move it out of sight. But the body remembers. The amygdala, your brain's threat detector, still fires. Your nervous system still floods with cortisol. Your heart still races. Your stomach still tightens. And all the while, you tell yourself you're fine. But you're not fine. You're full. Suppressed anger doesn't leave. It metastasizes into migraines, ulcers, muscle tension, emotional outbursts. Suppressed fear doesn't protect you. It paralyzes you, turns your world into a checklist of fake safety. Suppressed grief becomes numbness. Suppressed desire becomes shame. Suppressed creativity becomes self-doubt. And suppressed truth becomes anxiety. This is what trauma does. Not just big trauma, but accumulated micro-rejections. Being told to stay quiet, to be good, to hide who you are. Over time, your brain rewires itself for survival, not authenticity. Your prefrontal cortex, the center of logic and decision-making, begins to disconnect from your limbic system. You stop feeling, you start performing, and eventually, you don't even know who you are anymore. You just know how to seem okay. But inside, there's chaos. A war between who you had to be and who you really are. This is why you explode over little things. Why you sabotage what you love. Why you can't sit in silence without reaching for your phone. Your shadow is active. You just gave it another name. The symptoms are everywhere. Burnout, impulsivity, chronic fatigue, panic attacks with no cause, overthinking, over-controlling, overworking, overeating, always over, because you're trying to cover something up. The truth? You're not lazy. You're not crazy. You're not broken. You're overwhelmed by what you haven't faced. The brain doesn't delete what you repress. It stores it, files it away in the subconscious. And when the trigger hits, when someone says that thing, when you fail again, when you feel abandoned once more, it all comes flooding back. Not because you're weak, but because your nervous system has never stopped screaming. The longer you ignore the shadow, the more your mind turns into a battlefield. Integration isn't a luxury. It's survival. You were never taught to be whole. You were taught to be useful. From your earliest memories, you were not guided inward. You were guided away from yourself. Into roles, into rules, into masks. Be a good boy. Be a sweet girl. Don't cry. Don't talk back. Don't feel too much. You learned quickly that your sadness made people uncomfortable, that your anger got you punished, that your curiosity was too much. So you edited yourself. You smiled when you wanted to scream. You apologized for taking up space. You shrunk, until the shrinking felt normal. And somewhere along the way, you forgot what your real voice even sounded like. You weren't taught to integrate your shadow. You were programmed to exile it, because society doesn't want you whole. It wants you functional, profitable, predictable. It wants you productive when you're sad, polite when you're angry, silent when you're scared. It wants your fire bottled, your instincts dulled, your soul sterilized. And so you began to split, to sever the parts of you that didn't fit, to bury your grief under busyness, to drown your rage in entertainment, to suffocate your desire under shame, all while pretending to be fine. But you're not fine. You're fragmented. You wonder why your relationships fail, why you sabotage opportunities, why you feel numb when you should feel alive. It's not because you're broken. It's because you've been disconnected from your core. You were raised in systems that punish authenticity and reward performance. School didn't teach you to think. It taught you to obey, to memorize, regurgitate, conform, to sit still, raise your hand, color inside the lines. And the more you complied, the more you were praised. The workplace took that even further. Now your worth is measured by productivity metrics, deadlines, deliverables, output. You're not a soul. You are a unit. And then came the digital world. Social media taught you that identity is branding, that depth is dangerous, that your value is tied to how well you perform being you. So you curate, you filter, you post clever captions over silent suffering. You borrow thoughts that sound profound, while hiding the parts of you that are still bleeding. Because no one claps for inner conflict. They clap for clarity, certainty, simplicity. But you are not simple. You are layered, contradictory, vast. And everything you were told to repress is still inside you, waiting. You can't perform your way to wholeness. You can't productivity hack your way into integration. You have to look inward, into the places you were told to fear, into the shadow. Because if you don't, you will remain trapped in a life that looks perfect, but feels hollow. You are not here to be liked. You are not here to be safe. You are here to be real. And realness begins where repression ends. Ever feel triggered by something small, and you don't even know why? You're in traffic. Someone cuts you off. Suddenly you're filled with rage. But it's not about traffic, is it? That's your shadow. Not speaking. Reacting. Ever snap at someone you love, then feel the wave of shame crashing right after? You didn't mean to say it. You don't even believe it. But something in you needed to be heard. That's your shadow. Acting without permission. And then you rationalize it. You say you were tired. Or stressed. Or just having a bad day. But what if it wasn't just a bad day? What if it was a crack in the mask? A leak in the dam you've spent years building? You think your fears, your addictions, your self-doubt are random? They're not. They're echoes. Clues. Left behind by the parts of you you've exiled. Projection. Imposter syndrome. Chronic people-pleasing. Perfectionism. Self-sabotage. These aren't flaws. They're defense mechanisms. Desperate adaptations to survive in a world that never gave your full self a home. You sabotage relationships not because you don't want love, but because love requires vulnerability. And your shadow remembers what happened the last time you were vulnerable. You numb out with food, with scrolling, with alcohol, with work. Not because you're lazy or undisciplined, but because deep down, your repressed pain is screaming to be acknowledged. And numbing is safer than feeling. You stay small, quiet, invisible, not because you lack ambition, but because somewhere in you, a voice says, if they see the real me, they'll leave. You become hyper-independent, not because you're strong, but because you've learned that asking for help gets you hurt. You overthink everything, not because you're cautious, but because your intuition was ignored so many times you stopped trusting it. These are the fingerprints of your shadow. It's not evil. It's injured, and it doesn't want to destroy your life. It wants to be reintegrated into it. The shadow is the voice in the basement, banging on the door, begging to be seen, saying over and over, I exist. I'm still here. Don't forget me. And the more you ignore it, the more chaotic it becomes. Because energy repressed doesn't disappear. It mutates. Your shadow will do anything to be heard. It will wear the face of your ex. It will sabotage your job interview. It will speak through the panic attack at 2 a.m. It will erupt in moments that make no sense, until you realize it's not a moment. It's a message. Integration doesn't mean indulging every dark impulse. It means acknowledging where they come from, honoring the parts of you that were abandoned, facing the pain you've wrapped in 10 layers of logic. Because healing isn't about becoming better. It's about becoming whole. You can't outrun your shadow. You can't outwork it. You can't meditate it away. You have to turn around and meet the eyes of the self you left behind. That's where your real power begins. What if the reason you always feel on edge isn't because something's wrong with you, but because something inside you is trying to speak? What if your anxiety isn't a malfunction, but a message? What if your exhaustion isn't laziness, but the weight of pretending? You've spent years wondering what's broken, why you procrastinate, why you shut down when it matters most, why you smile when you want to scream, why success feels empty and rest feels dangerous. But maybe the real problem isn't weakness. It's fragmentation. You've been living with half a soul, half expressed, half alive, half seen. The parts you show, the kind, the productive, the presentable, aren't the whole you, because the whole you is wild, messy, contradictory, emotional, creative, hungry, honest. And somewhere along the way, you were told, that's too much, that's not safe, that's not allowed. So you split, you adapted, you amputated pieces of yourself just to survive. But survival isn't living, and adaptation isn't freedom. So now, you walk through life feeling like a stranger to your own desires. You look in the mirror and wonder, who am I really? You're not cold. You're cautious. You're not lazy. You're disconnected. You're not broken. You're unspoken. What if the version of you you've been chasing, the perfect, healed, productive self, isn't the goal? What if the real goal is reunion with the parts you buried, the anger you silenced, the fear you mocked, the desire you shamed, the creativity you dismissed as unrealistic? What if they've all been waiting for you, not to conquer them, but to hold them, to say, I see you, I hear you, you're allowed? Because healing doesn't mean becoming something new. It means returning to what's always been true. So ask yourself, who would you be if you stopped running from yourself? Who would you be if you embraced what you were taught to hide? Not just the light, but the chaos, the fire, the instinct, the intuition, the edge. Because maybe the version of you that scares you the most is the one that's finally free. Carl Jung once said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Shadow work isn't about becoming someone else. It's not about fixing yourself. It's not about becoming more spiritual, more calm, more healed. It's about meeting yourself, completely, honestly, brutally. It's about looking into the mirror and refusing to look away, even when what you see makes your hands shake, even when your voice trembles, even when the truth burns. Because that truth, the one you've been running from, is your compass. You don't kill the shadow. You integrate it. You listen. You feel. You learn its language, pain, anger, longing, fear. And you begin to translate it. You sit with the emotion instead of numbing it. You write it down instead of silencing it. You walk toward it instead of pushing it away. That's what healing actually looks like. Not an Instagram quote. Not a 10-step plan. But you, alone in your room, at 2 a.m., crying over a truth you finally allowed to surface. This is the work. Journaling the thoughts you never say out loud. Watching your dreams and asking what your unconscious is trying to tell you. Paying attention to your triggers, they are maps. Sitting in silence long enough to hear the voice beneath the noise. Going to therapy not to fix yourself, but to excavate the you beneath the mask. It's not pretty. It's not glamorous. But it's real. And the more you do it, the more you'll realize that the parts you've been hiding are sacred, that the rage has a message, that the fear was protecting something tender, that the jealousy was showing you your deepest unmet needs, that the desire you were ashamed of was pointing you toward life. What you've called too much is where your power lives. What you've silenced is where your voice waits. What you've exiled is where your soul remembers itself. So no, this won't be easy, but it will be worth it, because when the shadow is no longer your enemy, it becomes your ally. And in that moment, you stop living a half-life and start becoming whole. You are not broken. You were never broken. You were told that certain parts of you were unacceptable. So you hid them. You fragmented. You tried to survive in pieces. But what if I told you that the anger you bury is a compass, that the fear you silence is a guard dog, that the desire you shame is your life force, that none of it was ever a mistake? You are not broken. You are unfinished, unintegrated, unexpressed. And every feeling you've tried to suffocate is not a flaw. It's a message, a flare shot from the unconscious, begging you to stop running, to stop performing, to stop pretending that your light is all you are. You are not just kindness. You are also rage. You are not just discipline. You are also chaos. You are not just calm. You are also wild. And you don't have to choose. You were never meant to live with half a soul. You were never meant to amputate your authenticity to be good. The more whole you become, the less validation you'll crave, the less noise you'll tolerate, the less fear will control your life. You will stop shrinking. You will stop apologizing. And for the first time, you will feel powerful. Not because you became someone else, but because you finally remembered who you were. No more masks. No more self-erasure. No more living to please a world that told you to be small. The healing begins the moment you stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" and start asking, "What part of me is trying to come home?" You are not broken. You are becoming. Most people wear a mask until the day they die. They call it maturity. They call it strength. They call it normal. But the soul knows. It knows when you're lying. It knows when you've silenced yourself so deeply that even your own voice sounds like a stranger. And it mourns, quietly, in the background of your life, in the boredom you can't explain, in the tension that never leaves your chest, in the dreams you stopped having because you stopped believing. But a few, a rare, courageous few, walk back into the cave, not to conquer it, not to escape it, but to listen. And there, in the dark, they meet the monster, the one they've run from their whole lives. And they look closer, only to find a child, scared, rejected, still waiting to be held. That child is you, and it's still waiting. If you're still here, maybe you're one of the few. Maybe you're ready to stop performing. Maybe you're ready to become whole. Not by adding more, but by finally turning toward what you've exiled. This isn't self-help. This is self-return. So subscribe, not to follow us, but to follow yourself, deeper than you've ever dared to go. You are not here to be perfect. You are here to remember, to gather the scattered pieces of your soul, and come back to life, not polished, not painless, but real, raw, whole. You don't need to be fixed. You just need to come home.